In 2006, a busload of footballers returning from the Caulfield races was yelling anti-Semitic slurs at Jewish children walking to the synagogue. They subsequently violently attacked Menachem in front of his children, and astonishingly, the bus that the footballers were in was being driven by an off-duty member of Victorian Police. What's worse, that officer then deliberately hindered the investigation of the attack, making it difficult to identify the attacker. Well, they picked the wrong bloke, and Menachem took the police and the football club on. More recently, he's now using Victoria's laws to take actions against the key figures in the anti-Israel movement who've incited hatred against Australia's Jewish community. Menachem's lodged a race hate complaint against, wait for it, Victorian Police for giving the go-ahead to an anti-Israel rally that turned violent. It's going to be a test of laws governing protests and free speech, as well as police who perhaps once again have failed to act appropriately, and once again they may have picked the wrong bloke. Menachem, what the hell is going on in Melbourne?
I think, Daniel, we could ask the same question about Australia-wide. I mean, we know that in this country we have a right to be proud and secure in our identity, yet we've seen some really horrible and visceral language used towards the Jewish community, and our legal authorities and our police and our politicians almost stand idly by and let it happen.
Now, you've not only had experiences directly with anti-Semitism, for example, the incident I just spoke about, but just this week, when the Houthis under Yemen actually launched missiles into Israel, that attacked an apartment building, and your niece was impacted by that. Let's have a look at the clip.
חבר'ה, נפל כטב"ם בתל אביב, בשחוב שלום עליכם, מתחת לבית שלי, פיצץ לי את כל החלונות בבית, החלונות באוטו, פינו את כל האנשים מהבתים.
So you've experienced firsthand what happens when people want to hurt Jews. First of all, how's your niece and what's happening over there?
So she's been released from hospital. So thankfully she's no longer in hospital, but it was a very terrifying experience. The apartment she was in, the windows were shattered, the ceiling came down, and she received some cuts and some trauma and the like. But I guess this is where the danger is. There's a significant difference between military combat and justified actions between two states, and one's targeting civilians, particularly, young innocent civilians trying to go about their lives on a day-to-day basis. And when we hear people on the streets chant, all Zionists are terrorists, or call for chants, the river to the sea, we're giving license to this type of horrible behaviour that sees lives, including the lives of my niece, placed at risk. And that's just not tolerable.
Well, one of the amazing things is that these violent acts are happening, whether it's Hamas killing innocents in Israel, whether it's Houthis or Hezbollah firing missiles into Israel. And yet you have people in this country, including political parties such as the Greens, effectively cheering for the people who are doing this. And they do it supposedly under a pro-Palestinian banner. So they purport to care about Palestine. But in effect, it's really just anti-Israel, or if not anti-Semitic, isn't it?
100%. And I think that's where we're losing sight of what's really at stake here. What, in essence, the Greens and those around them seem to be suggesting is that Israel as a state has no right to exist. And let's not forget, Israel is not really 75 years old. It's really 3,000 plus years old. The modern state of Israel might be 75 years, but that was a response to the Holocaust and the Balfour Declaration back in the early 1900s. So really what they're calling for is a wipeout of Jewish history and Jewish ties to the land that date back over 3,000 years, and just reprehensible.
And as a religious Jewish man, and as someone who looks like a religious Jewish man, do you feel safe walking around Melbourne with your children at the moment?
I'm very self-aware, but I've actually made a point, and I always tell my kids this, if someone abuses you, don't fight back, go down with a punch and come back with a lawyer. I would rather go down and be assaulted for being a Jew than hide my Jewish identity. I'm a proud Jew, I'm a proud Australian Jew, and I don't believe that we should hide our identity, nor should we cower to those who seek to destroy us. That's not a mistake I'm going to allow happen.
But speaking of cowardice, do you get the impression that the Victoria Police stand back and effectively let this happen?
Well, I think it's greater than the police. I think it's our political leadership. I think it's a simple arithmetic game that they see it as, and I believe, 800,000 Muslim voters and Greens preferences versus 100,000 Jews. And mathematically, they go, politely, I'd rather have the 800,000 Muslim votes and the Greens preferences and worry about the 100,000 Jews I might upset.
Well, I think it's very dangerous when a government is prepared to throw Western civilization or a modern liberal democracy such as Israel under the bus in exchange for a few votes. But it sounds like that's where we are. And when we end up with this sort of two-tier policing, when certain crimes will be arrested and prosecuted and others will be left alone. On a previous episode of this show, we showed Victorian Police standing around while a Jewish man was essentially assaulted by a group of protesters, and his only crime was standing in the right place at the wrong time. Let's have a look at what happened when a pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel protester decided to interfere with the Swedish police, and let's see how they handled it.
Hey, I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry.
She picked the wrong vehicle to stand in front of. But look, there's always a fine line between free speech and legitimate protest. And tell us a bit about the action that you've initiated in Victoria and how it's going to navigate that.
Well, it's actually really interesting you say that, because people throw out the word freedom of speech without actually understanding the law itself. There is a right to freedom of speech, but that right is not an absolute one. It is subject to some reasonable limitations, including the prohibition about engaging in racial or religious vilification. You cannot get up and say all Muslims are terrorists. We wouldn't tolerate it. In the same way, you cannot get up and say all Zionists or all Jews are terrorists, because that divides our society. So freedom of speech doesn't allow hate speech. And I think that is something that the message needs to come through on. And that is something that the government has failed to prosecute. And at the end of the day, in Victoria, the ultimate decision rests with the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, which is at a government appointment by the Attorney General. So the decision to prosecute or not prosecute is ultimately the decision of the government of the day.
Well, Menachem, you're obviously a fighter and you're not going to take things lying down, and you've got a lot of people in your corner, so we'll be watching this very